Now, here's Ed Bernstein.
Hi, welcome to our show. My guests today are two gentlemen that are going to help solve the world crisis, starting in the Middle East and branching out to the rest of the world. Dr. Gard Jameson and Imam Mujahid Ramadan. Welcome.
Yeah, good morning. Thank you.
I mean, where do we begin? I mean, let's talk about a little bit about the Middle East. Okay, I mean, it's very confusing to say the least. I've always, everybody talks about the terrorists and the radical Muslims. My question to you, Mujahid, where are the moderates to speak up?
On your show? Well, it's interesting
Because don't they say like it's only, we're talking 10% of the Muslim population, has this violent these violent tendencies, and 85–90% are peace loving. Want to get along with everybody.
That's a big,
right?
Really, that's what the religion calls for. So the 10%, we can categorically say this is an extreme idea, an extreme personality, an extreme ideology that has a long history that probably relates back to many events that have occurred historically, probably even dating back centuries. But currently speaking, the climate, say, let's say for instance, in Iraq with the Islamic State or the ISIS group, the forcing all Christians now, you either move, accept Sunni Islam, or you can be killed. Those type extreme ideas are really fermented around people who have extreme frustrations, who have been faced with extreme difficulties, not justifying their behavior, and seemingly have lost their way in terms of what the religion prescriptions provides for them, or the guidance of what Muhammad the Prophet gave to them.
How does that happen? I mean, look, you have Catholics believe that you have to, essentially be Catholic to go to heaven, right? But they're not killing people to force them to turn to be Catholic, right? So where does this extreme?
Well, I think, one, if you look in many of the areas that we're speaking about, there is a high level of illiteracy in many regards. There has been a substantial amount of political persecution dating back even before Saddam Hussein. The recent effects of a Maliki government, say for instance in Iraq, which isolated the Sunni population, and even the quote-unquote moderate Sunnis who were looking to have a part and play a role in government did get an opportunity to. So it allowed for a group like ISIS then to ferment and say, you're not being treated right by the Maliki government, which is a Shia-based government. And Maliki was a terrible leader. The U.S. has been asking him to leave. His own country has been asking him. So they really created an environment to produce this kind of almost insane behavior of this ISIS group now that moderates are moving towards, because they don't seem to have another voice. The problem happens to be that's not a resolution. And it's going to be a really difficult situation, because this has been a long-term event that has long historical significance to it. And how do we resolve it now? And I think you asked the question. The moderates really have to be a part of the role of stepping in, filling the void, and understanding what we in this country really see as important: inclusion.
Yeah, but I've been wondering about this since 9/11, when we were dealing with Osama bin Laden. Where were all the moderate voices to speak up? Where have they been in the last 15 years?
I think a lot of it has been silenced by the noise, because that's generally what we're hearing a lot of, and because there's not an effort by those who consider themselves moderate to galvanize and give direction to and give vision to what does Islam look like in the 21st century. It gives room for, because we'll say nature abhors a vacuum, because there's this big vacuum that's going on there. Then it gives rooms for either the Osama bin Laden type of mindset, or the ISIS type mindset, or even the mindset that there's in Gaza between quote unquote Hamas and Israel. Really not so much the Palestinian people, because the moderate voice is not being heard among the Palestinians. Then it gives the extreme idea of Hamas a chance to ferment, because that becomes the only voice at that point in time. I think that the U.S. works well by advancing and working with those who have moderate concerns, who are willing to look at collaboration, who are willing to look at reconciliation, who are willing to look at how do we all get along together in a world that's multi-ethnic, that's multi-religious, that's multicultural. How do we do that? Now, here in the United States, we have the best opportunity for it, but in many of those places, the isolation has really produced the kind of circumstances, and it doesn't seem to be an immediate result. The president's new idea of saying, well, now we're going to go further military into this right here. A military solution is not going to be the solution in either situation. As we've seen in Gaza, it was up, then it was down, there was some peace, and then there was no fire. Now we're back to shooting again.
I'd ask the question. Ed used the term, or the figure 10%. That feels really high to me.
Very high. It's probably really more about 3%. And it's that, and it's the 95-5%. 5% of the people cause 95% of the problems. I say 3 to 5% because most of the people, look at your Muslim population here in the United States. Even if there's a protest, I appreciate the fact that in the recent protests on Las Vegas Boulevard were ones where I may not have agreed with methodology, but it was a peaceful protest.
Right.
I think many other places in the United States, the protests have been peaceful. What we have to be concerned about, though, is the more those conflicts go on there, how much does that reverberate back in this country? Because I watched last week where it went from one situation where we began to be more specific in terms of how people were talking. So those type things we have to be concerned about.
Now, the person who can resolve this is the man who is like known for why can't we all get along. Dr. Jameson's made a career out of trying to teach diversity and get along and work with every different ethnicity and religion and making this happen.
Right.
So, Dr. Jameson, how do we do this?
Well, I think there's an interesting line that was provided by a Catholic minister by the name of Dr. Hans Kung, and he said there will be no peace among the nations until there's peace among the religions, and there will be no peace among the religions until there's dialogue among the religions. So what we have, even in America, is we have sectarianism. So we have conservative elements of even our Catholic, of our Christian, Jewish, and Islamic traditions that are sectarian in their perspective. So to a certain extent, they're actually promoting the kind of bias, prejudice, and bigotry that we're seeing in the world. Yes, it's more violent in the Middle East, but they're promoting that quality of consciousness. And Einstein said something very interesting. He said, you will never change a problem with the same consciousness that created the problem. So how do we change consciousness? And that, to me, is the $64 question. I recently was speaking to a cleric and asking about contemplative prayer and suggesting that contemplative prayer is a way to calm the mind and create, if you will, a quality of consciousness that allows for dialogue and allows for peacemaking to occur. And he said, my priests have a hard enough time doing their liturgy. They don't have time for contemplative prayer. So unless we make time for dialogue with the divine and then make time for dialogue with each other, we will not have peace among the nations nor among the religions. So we as individuals, whether we're Christians, Jews, or Muslims, need to be advocates for interfaith dialogue because it is, in my opinion, the single most important thing we can be doing for peace on the planet. If you look at Nelson Mandela, or you look at Martin Luther King, you look at these great souls, they were all advocates for interfaith dialogue.
Right.
So all three of the religions, the major religions that you talked about, Christianity, Islam, Judaism, derive out of Abraham, one person.
We all claim him as our father.
Now, the interesting thing about this, because I've done a little bit of reading about Abraham, is that it seemed to me that Abraham was thousands of years ago, and that as a result of that story or that birth or whatever, that man, if he did in fact live, it seems like each religion put their own spin on Abraham. I mean, the story starts with one element, and then it branches off in 3 different directions. And it seemed like everybody's kind of made up little stories.
So Ed, you're a father. You have children.
Right.
Is there such a thing as sibling rivalry in families? Do you ever notice?
Cain and Abel.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah.
Exactly. And I believe in Abraham's own family. Mujahid, you want to share the story? There was a little sibling rivalry
Isaac,
there.
we have, and then we have Ishmael, and so there we have, and then the continual rivalry of their descendants. Actually, Rabbi Mel Hecht, every now and then when Mel introduced, he says, my first cousin, Mujahid Ramadan, and someone says to me once, Ramadan's kind of, I didn't know that you and Mel Hecht was some kin like that. But it's just those realities that, and this, but we, so from that Abrahamic faith, we're probably largely the big 3 groups that probably have a lot of conflict among one another.
And they were, by the way, half-brothers.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Right.
Very much so. Yes.
I mean,
same father, different mother.
Exactly.
Right,
So that
right.
caused its own set of issues.
No doubt about it.
Yeah.
And I think that extends all the way down to our own even local levels in terms of how do we see one another. And that's been some of the great work that Gard has been a great leader in, and with the Interfaith Council and the direction we've gone into over the years.
What is that?
Well, the Interfaith Council of Southern Nevada works along those lines of inclusion, dialogue. How do we bring people together around the common concerns of being human beings, and really sharing enough time with one another to where we get a chance to see how do we How do we see one another? How do we even perceive God? The subject I'm going to be speaking on in our upcoming series of interfaith dialogues will be how do your religion perceive God? How do you view God? I had to recently say to a number of my Christian brothers and sisters in the NAACP, I worship the same God that you worship. But in the 21st century, it's kind of interesting. I had to tell them that when they were saying, well, Ramadan, your God and our God. No, there's only one God. I don't get how you call him.
Well, you're a Muslim, and you formerly were a Christian?
Yes, grew up in a Christian family.
Right.
Parents, fathers are preachers, grandfather was preachers in the church.
So when you look, what caused you to change? Make the answer short if you can.
Got an hour here for that? I think, really spiritual development, a spiritual appetite, having a spiritual appetite that I did not see within the realm of Christianity. I didn't see that need and perception of how we see God. I saw God in a different view than the traditional Christian tradition that I grew up in, so it caused me to look and study and look and see what's going to meet my spiritual appetite. I found it in Islam.
So why do you care, not you personally, but you as representing the Muslim religion, for instance, care about what Gard may believe or what I may believe and what my, philosophy about God is?
Because God requires that of me as a Muslim. The Holy Quran itself, our holy book, says of the people of the book. And it speaks directly of Jews and Christians. It doesn't speak outside of that. Among them are believers. So God himself designates Jews and Christians as believing people. I have a responsibility then to promote that same type of relationship among those individuals. And I've also had the benefit, Ed, of growing up here in the United States. I went to high school, junior high school and high school with children who I first met from the Jewish tradition, who I maintain a relationship with now. Once I became a Muslim, why should my relationship that I had with them historically of being good friends, why should that have changed? And that's the position that I took. I grew up in a Christian family, in a Christian household. I benefit from the Christian values that my parents gave me, and those values I still live by. So I actually gained from, I think I'm a better Muslim because I have the background that I have.
And what you realize eventually is it's not just a duty, it's a privilege and a joy.
Big.
So many of the people that are involved with Interfaith come to our gatherings and say, I get more out of this than I get out of my local congregation.
Right. The traditional
Why?
message.
Because they see the larger sense of the family of God.
Right.
And they recognize that we're all brothers and sisters, and that God's love is really unconditional, and it really spans the gap. Does God believe in this book or that book? No, it's not about books with God. It's about people, and it's about hearts and about minds.
Right.
And so once you get that, then you realize there's a joy in this work.
Very much.
And that joy is what really motivates both of us.
And the Interfaith Council is, we can talk a little bit about it and how somebody gets information about it.
Yeah, the Interfaith Council is local here. We are part of the North American Interfaith Network as well as United Religious Initiative. And we have events in our website. You can see on the TV screen is interfaithsn.org. You can see those events and you can find out about those events. We have the fall forums coming up. Right. We have the Mayor's Prayer Breakfast in November. And we have Camp Anytown, which is a very interesting thing where we sponsor about 70 kids from the Valley. They come up and they learn about their own prejudice, bias, and bigotry. And what's interesting is even in minorities, they recognize, hey, I've got some prejudices too.
Right.
And when they break those down, there's this, if you will, change in their attitude, which is a change in their whole life. And so I can point to people who are leaders in our community who've been part of Camp Anytown, whose lives were transformed during that 3-day period.
Are we born with this feeling that xenophobia, to be threatened by people who are different from us, whether it be religion or color or ethnicity or whatever it may be? Is that inbred in people?
Go and look at the babies. Just watch babies play among each other, and they'll let you know, look, you have to teach me how to, what it says, nobody is born a bigot. So this is taught and transferred from parents, many times unconsciously. They say our subconscious biases, really, our unconscious biases we actually download from parents and from the cultural environment that we grow up in. Even to the degree that even among African Americans, a recent event that went on here, This is among largely African Americans, where one group decided to be biased against another group just based on religion. I think those type things we grow to learn from people. They're unhealthy. It would be better if we would allow for our children to develop their perceptions of how they're going to see the people on their own. Along with that, the culture we grow up in, the televisions, movies that we're exposed to, all of these things begin to. But if you want to see the innocence of children, if we want to see Adam, the original human being, just go out to the baby hospital where there are babies at, and you get to see the original human being untouched. I think what they call it tabula rasa.
Absolutely.
The blank slate. It hasn't been written on. But when we start writing bias, bigotry, racism, and prejudice, we make for unhealthy people.
So maybe we need to start with young parents.
Absolutely,
Yes.
start with young parents.
Yes.
And what you appreciate, I'm an amateur paleontologist, and I like fossils. Why? Because I'm becoming one. But what you learn in evolutionary theory is that we're actually born with a maternal instinct. We're actually born with an instinct for the good, for altruism. So there's a slight preference there, and that is the most basic evolutionary instinct. There are other evolutionary instincts about fear and survival, so on and so forth. But we are born to be good. So what needs to occur is we need to cultivate that as parents and as a community and as a nation.
And where there is, and a lot of Camp Anytown, my grandmother used to say, she says, working with children is like molding clay, but working with grown folks is like spray painting on water. When I first heard it, okay, Grandma, got it. Now, it took me about 40 years to figure it out, but it was right. It's that, you know, and I think the Bible says, and bend the stalk while it's yet young. So if we can help shape and form personalities around understanding that we're all connected. I think the verse in the Bible that comes to mind most to me is love your neighbor as yourself, because really your neighbor is yourself. We're not separate. We're all connected, and this whole world is connected like that. So any hurt, what was it Dr. King says, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice?
Everywhere.
Everywhere. Because this world is, computer technology now tells us we can connect the world with the click of a mouse. We were always connected like that as spiritual beings. Was it Chardin, the French philosopher, says we're spiritual beings having a physical experience? And when we see ourselves in the spiritual form, then we'll see the relationship we have with all men and all women and all people of different races and backgrounds and religions. That would be the key for us to move above just this physical life that we live in.
And this is happening, Ed. What's exciting is if you look at the interfaith movement, it's a fairly new phenomenon. So back in the 60s, there were maybe 10 interfaith councils around the country. Now there are over 200 interfaith councils around the country. The work of Nelson Mandela and Martin Luther King has helped to advance interfaith understanding. So we're kind of sitting in the cross currents right now. But some very exciting things are happening. I'm working with a group right now. We're trying to promote the next Parliament of the World Religions in Morocco. Wouldn't that be nice? Because Morocco is a moderate country. It has a democracy.
In
it
the
has
middle
a king.
of center of all this.
Big chaos.
Yeah.
Big chaos. And so the king there is interested in this. And wouldn't it be lovely to have a Parliament of the World Religions in Morocco? There have been 5 parliaments of world religions. One was in Cape Town with Nelson Mandela. One was in Barcelona with Jane Goodall and others. But these are things that are happening now, and they're increasing in momentum. So there's a lot of reason for hope right now on the planet, because there are a lot of people like Mujahid Ramadan who are promoting this kind of peacemaking.
By the same token, you have this element of hope. The internet, and you started referring to the internet, has also caused a lot of the problems here, because the hate seems to spread. It spreads quickly. There is more. People are more transitory. You know, in and out of countries. You can fly here, fly there. The bad guys can get to different places and form organizations and groups and promote evil.
Yes.
You know, so how do we combat that? I mean, other than what you're apparently saying that, hey, we can use all these same functions for good.
Absolutely.
Right.
And what's happening right now, if you look around, is oftentimes we say the media, if it bleeds, it leads.
Right.
And so we see that phenomena. And again, it's the 3% of the Muslims who make a bad name for, it's kind of like we say, the 90% of the attorneys make a bad name for the others.
Right.
No, to 10%.
Oh, did I get that wrong?
The numbers go up there.
Did I get that wrong? So anyway, what you see is there's a lot of great things that are going on right now, but they're not given a lot of attention in the media. But that will be happening.
Right. And certainly we have to, I think schools are a good place to work because our children spend a substantial amount of time in schools. I think that faith communities across the board are going to have to be more assertive and taking steps to not only look at their own houses of worship, but how do we connect together and interact with one another? I think that we're going to have to be, and even within certain traditions themselves, within the Christian tradition, within the Muslim tradition, because in Iraq, what we're really seeing now is that the group that is there, they're against really everybody who's not Sunni. So whether you're Christian or you're Shiite or whatever you happen to be, they're against that. And I think those who are for all of working together have to really form a coalition and invite those who tend to have that separatist mindset that we are separate. We are not separate. This world in Islam is called Tawheed, that everything is connected.
And there's one more piece here that's really interesting. I teach at the university, and I will say 95% of my students are not connected to institutional religion. The millennial generation is moving away in large numbers from institutional religion. Well, why is that? Because they're not being fed. They see the quality of hypocrisy and violence and sectarianism, and they're asking the questions. And so it's really important in this moment that those questions be addressed with the quality of intentional dialogue.
Why is there such fear about women, particularly in some of these extremist countries, extremist groups? I mean, they seem to just, you know, be anti-women, feminine growth. Is that because you offer the solution to this?
Jimmy Carter said it, and he said it well. He said if you take 7 Palestinian mothers who have lost children, 7 Israeli mothers who have lost children, you put them into a room, they will come up with a peace plan that will last forever. I think men fear women. We're all husbands here. There's a certain amount
we
of
know they're smart.
Well, it's public today.
So there's a quality of insight. There's that maternal instinct, which again provides the solutions. And so it's time to turn over some of the reins of power to the women.
To the women. Because we've seen historically, there is Gard has made note of it, and women tend to find those solutions probably easier without so much ego tendencies that's involved in it. And many of the countries you speak of, in particular when it comes to Muslims, you'll find that the populations where you see this extreme idea of Islam and rejection of everybody else's way and concepts, you'll find there's a deliberate intention to not educate women. The rate of illiteracy in countries like Egypt, like Pakistan, many of the African nations, that the rate of illiteracy among women is very, very higher than it is among men. Well, if we have women who are illiterate, then we're going to have children who are illiterate. Well, that's an easy population to pull in a type of extremist idea. So you got a farm team if you just keep women illiterate. My grandmother was right. The hand that rocks the cradle rules the world.
Yeah, but then the tradition of all 3 of the major religions have discriminated essentially against women.
Very much, yes.
Sure.
And Islam, I mean, not so much Islam, but Muslims are at the forefront of that type of discrimination, regretfully.
I mean, Christians or Catholics, Jews. I mean, you know, it's recently that you know they can become active in the church and active in the synagogues and temples.
But if you go back traditionally, if you go back prior to industrialization and civilization, you will find that women dominated the culture.
Very much.
Most of the artifacts that have been found prior to 10,000 BC have been feminine gods and goddesses.
Right.
And so that indicates something. And what we had was the advance of patriarchy with the Abrahamic traditions.
Right, And the Industrial
So again,
Revolution.
what we have is a pendulum swing, and what we're seeing now is the pendulum's coming back the other way.
Right. You know,
And
actually,
that's a good thing.
The base of the Quran itself, when it talks about the origin of the human being, it points to the original human being. The word that's used is a feminine word. So, you know, there's much even in Scripture, but now that's not going to be mentioned by any Muslims now. You're not going to hear that too often because, quite frankly, we don't want to think that God was feminine or the original nature that we call Adam was feminine. There's much there in the Scripture itself that reflects, and how you treat the woman is given greater importance. The value of the woman or the daughter in society. It's the daughters, they say, if you have 3 daughters, you raise them well, and you give them a good life, then they could open the door to paradise for the father. They don't say that for the sons. They say the gateway of paradise lie at the feet of the mother. That's not for the father. That's what God is saying, and that's what his divine prophets have given. But now bring it down to men at our level, well, we have a different challenge on our hands.
Well, why are these passages in the Quran not more publicized? Not, you know.
Interesting.
You always read about the violent things.
Very much so.
And there's violent things in all the Bibles.
All of them, yes. Right. I think because God made note, if it bleeds, it leads. So if you put those type of ideas out there, it serves 2 purposes. One is very dramatic, so the public really buys into it very quickly, and the other one happens to be it further for Islam. It dramatizes that they really shouldn't count because look how they present.
The other piece that I think is important is many of these Islamic countries are just newly finding their nationhood. And so we know with any nation there are revolutionary currents at the beginning of those nations. So there's a large political dimension to all of this as well, and that can't be discounted. For many, many years, right, most of those nations were colonized by European countries. And there was aggressive colonization, there was a lot of injustice. So that reaction, and I think 9/11 was a wake-up call, and I don't think we asked the question, why did that happen? I don't think we seriously had a dialogue about why that occurred. That wasn't about a few terrorists getting in an airplane and going through buildings. That was about something much larger. And for us to have a serious conversation about what was behind that truly would lead to a quality of reconciliation, a quality of peacemaking that I think would advance the causes on all fronts.
As I said earlier, looking at it historically, you know, if you look, like somebody, go back to World War I and see what happened at the end of World War I. And the colonization that occurred for the next like 40 or 50 years is very interesting. The groups that really try to represent Islam and present what Islam to the general public today is a traumatized population of people, traumatized through the colonization. And when you're in trauma, without counseling, the type of behavior that we get, this is more somewhat post-traumatic stress syndrome behavior, really what we're seeing. These are the symptoms of the traumatization. Now, you have to freely engage in it yourself, but Gard made note of it. There's some historical factors that this won't allow us much time for, but it doesn't deny the fact that wrong is still wrong.
It comes back to trust. Do we trust one another? And the only way trust is established is through genuine dialogue, and that's why the Interfaith Council is so very important.
You know, even with trust and love, every now and then you're going to, I think Scripture gives us the idea, in order to trust and love, sometimes you're going to feel some pain. There's going to be some discomfort. Right? Thank you very much. I just celebrated with my wife 42 years this week, and it's a very interesting experience. I have to thank her because I wouldn't have, if I could have gotten rid of me, I would have gotten rid of me, but she kept me for 42 years. So I can appreciate the fact of that, and she's been very loving and trusting in that, so I appreciate it.
So once again, if somebody's interested in the Interfaith Council and some of the programs and some of the educational programs you have, the website is
interfaithsn.org, and we encourage you to go there, and you'll see a lot of our programs, you'll see a lot of videos, and it'll help you understand why interfaith is so important.
By the way, do you have to belong to a major religion to be part of that interfaith? I mean, it could be an atheist or an agnostic?
Absolutely. We have interfaith forums and gatherings in the community every month, and we have everybody, every shade.
Good learning experience. I learned a tremendous amount from the Wiccan tradition. Had a completely different perception of what media had given me. Found out the origin of it. It's a lot different. It's surprising. Even for someone who's quote unquote religiously or spiritually informed, come out to it.
Okay. Well, I understand you guys are both going to Cairo to solve the Mideast peace crisis.
Morocco.
After Morocco. Oh, I'm going to Morocco. Okay. All right. Well, hurry up and get there. Well, thank you, Dr. Gard Jameson, Mujahid Ramadan. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed, for inviting us on the show. Thank you.
Accidents don't discriminate. They can happen anywhere to anybody. It really comes down to results.
Enough said. Call Ed.
I'm Ed Bernstein, and I've been getting those results for nearly 40 years.
EdBernstein.com.